I never thought I'd be the guy typing this out. I always figured stories like mine were things that happened to other people, never me. My wife, Brittany, and I have been married for 8 years. She was my college sweetheart, my partner in everything, and the one person I thought I could trust completely. We have a 7-year-old daughter, Ellie, who's the light of my life. On the surface, we were the perfect little family. Lately, though, things had been off. It started subtly, like these things always do. Brittany had been working longer hours at her job. She's a marketing manager at this big company downtown, and while it's a demanding role, she used to have great boundaries. We'd agreed early on that work wouldn't consume her life. But in the past few months, there had been a noticeable change. There were these new networking events, happy hours with colleagues, and all sorts of late-night meetings. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'd even encouraged her, telling her how proud I was of her hard work. I've always tried to be supportive. I figured it was just a busy season at the company or some big campaign she was working on. But then the phone habit started. She was glued to her phone constantly. Whenever we'd sit down to watch a movie or eat dinner as a family, she'd be texting. The worst part? She'd angle the screen away from me or lock it whenever I got close. Brittany and I had always been an open book couple. We knew each other's passwords, shared our schedules, and never had anything to hide. Now, though, locked screens, vague excuses, and this weird, distant vibe every time I tried to connect with her. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Everyone has a right to some privacy, right? Maybe she was planning a surprise for my birthday, or just needed her own space. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who reads too much into things. But I couldn't help noticing the little changes piling up. One night, I made dinner while she was on the couch scrolling through her phone. Ellie was upstairs working on some school project, and the house was unusually quiet. I walked over to ask Brittany something about the weekend plans, and she practically jumped out of her skin when I got close. She slammed her phone down on the armrest and gave me this nervous little laugh. "Geez, Caleb! Sneak up on me, why don't you?" she said, with a fake smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Didn't mean to scare you," I replied, feeling a little hurt. "What's so secretive over there?" She rolled her eyes and waved me off like I was being ridiculous. "It's just boring work emails, babe. Nothing exciting." Now, here's the thing about Brittany, she doesn't roll her eyes. Ever. She's always been sweet, maybe a little fiery when she's passionate about something, but she doesn't dismiss me like that. Her reaction felt off. I stood there for a moment, watching her fiddle with her phone, pretending like nothing was wrong. Then, she got up and walked into the kitchen, mumbling something about grabbing a glass of water. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while she slept soundly beside me. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in my gut. Something was wrong. I tried to think back over the past few months, trying to pinpoint when this shift had started. It wasn't just the late nights or the phone. There was this distance between us now, like she was keeping a part of herself hidden. Even when she was home, she wasn't here. She'd zone out during conversations or brush off my attempts to spend time together. Our intimacy had taken a hit too. We'd always been affectionate, cuddling on the couch, sneaking kisses in the kitchen, all those little things that make a relationship feel alive. Lately, though, she'd pull away from my touch, saying she was too tired or stressed from work. I thought maybe she was just burnt out, so I started doing more around the house. I'd take over cooking, cleaning, and helping Ellie with her homework to give Brittany a break. But instead of being grateful, she seemed annoyed, like my efforts were somehow bothering her. One Saturday, I suggested we go out as a family, maybe to the park or the zoo. Ellie was thrilled, but Brittany hesitated. "I can't," she said, not even looking up from her phone. "I've got too much work to catch up on." I didn't push it, but I couldn't ignore the disappointment on Ellie's face. She'd been drawing a picture of the three of us holding hands in front of a big tree, excited to show Brittany. That night, when I tucked Ellie into bed, she asked, "Why doesn't Mommy want to play with us anymore?" Her question broke me. I didn't have an answer, so I just kissed her forehead and told her mommy was really busy but still loved us. The words felt hollow even as I said them. A few days later, I got my first real hint that something was seriously wrong. Brittany was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced over out of habit, and saw a notification from someone named Mark. I didn't recognize the name, which was odd because we've always known each other's friends and colleagues. The preview read, "Can't stop thinking about today. You looked amazing." My stomach dropped. I stared at the message on Brittany's phone, my heart racing so loudly I was sure it would wake her, even though she was still in the shower. The name, Mark, didn't mean anything to me, but the text? That told me everything I didn't want to know. Can't stop thinking about today. You looked amazing. What the hell was this? Who was Mark? And why was he saying something like that to my wife? My brain scrambled for an explanation, anything that didn't involve the obvious. Maybe it was a coworker joking around? Maybe I was misreading the context? I wanted to believe that. But then I thought about her behavior lately, the late nights, the secrecy, the locked phone, and how distant she'd been. It all started clicking together like pieces of a horrible puzzle. I didn't open the message. I didn't want to invade her privacy any more than I already had just by reading the preview. Instead, I set the phone back down exactly as it was and walked out of the bedroom, trying to calm my racing thoughts. By the time Brittany came out of the shower, towel drying her hair and scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong, I was sitting in the living room pretending to read a book. She didn't say a word to me, and I couldn't bring myself to look at her. The rest of the evening was painfully normal. We had dinner, helped Ellie with her school project, and watched a little TV before bed. Brittany laughed at some sitcom jokes and even gave me a kiss goodnight, but all I could think about was that message. Who was Mark? The next morning, I couldn't resist the urge to dig a little deeper. Brittany had left for work early, and I was home with Ellie, trying to keep it together. While she played with her toys, I started doing some quiet research. Brittany and I share a family laptop, and she often logs into her email account there. I knew it was wrong, but the need to know the truth outweighed everything else. When I opened her email, I didn't find anything suspicious, at first. Most of it was work-related, with a few junk emails thrown in. But then I noticed something odd. There were no personal emails at all. Brittany used to send me cute little notes, or forward funny memes she found online. There was none of that anymore. In fact, her inbox was too clean, like she'd been scrubbing it regularly. That's when I noticed the trash folder. My hands were shaking as I clicked on it. Buried between some automated work notifications and spam emails, I found a thread with someone named Mark Roberts. The subject lines were innocuous, like, "Follow-up from lunch," and "Great ideas for the team." But the content? It was anything but professional. I skimmed the messages, my heart sinking with every line. Mark wasn't just some coworker, he was something more. Their exchanges were flirtatious and personal, with inside jokes I didn't understand. One email stood out though, a message from Brittany that read, "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about it." My head spun. Last night? While I was home with Ellie, cooking dinner and helping her with her schoolwork, Brittany had been with him. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I closed the laptop and stared at the wall, trying to process what I just uncovered. The woman I loved, the mother of my child, was lying to me. For the rest of the day, I went through the motions like a robot. I played with Ellie, cooked lunch, and even cracked a few jokes with her, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept replaying those emails in my head, wondering how long this had been going on. Was it just a fling, or something deeper? When Brittany got home that evening, she greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, acting like everything was fine. It was so normal, so casual, that I almost second-guessed myself. Maybe I'd overreacted? Maybe there was an explanation for all of this. But as I watched her laugh with Ellie, my gut told me otherwise. That night, after Brittany fell asleep, I decided to check her phone. I know, it's a breach of trust, but at this point, I couldn't trust her either. This time, I found what I'd been dreading. There were more messages from Mark, and they weren't subtle. They were making plans to meet up again, talking about how much they missed each other. The worst one was from Brittany. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Caleb doesn't suspect a thing." I wanted to scream, to wake her up and confront her right then and there. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there in the dark, staring at the messages until my vision blurred. I had the proof. My wife was cheating on me with one of her colleagues, and she was bold enough to think I wouldn't find out. The anger was there, burning in my chest, but so was something else. Sadness. Grief. I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing the life I thought we'd built together. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed to figure out my next move. After that night, everything changed. I couldn't look at Brittany the same way anymore. Every time she smiled at me or kissed my cheek, it felt fake, like she was playing a role in some twisted show, and I was the oblivious fool in the audience. But I wasn't oblivious anymore. I knew what she was hiding, and it was only a matter of time before I confronted her. Still, I wanted to be smart about it. This wasn't just about finding out the truth, it was about protecting Ellie, our finances, and my sanity. If this was going to explode, I needed all the ammunition I could get. The first step was figuring out just how deep this affair went. Was it a recent thing? Or had she been lying to me for years? I didn't want to believe the latter, but the evidence I'd already found suggested otherwise. The next day, I called in sick to work. Ellie was at school, and Brittany had left early for another meeting. I decided to dig through her things while I had the house to myself. I started with her purse. I felt guilty rummaging through it, but my gut told me there was more to find. Sure enough, tucked inside one of the smaller compartments, I found a receipt from a hotel downtown. It was dated 2 weeks ago, a night she'd claimed to be working late. The room was paid for in cash, and the name on the receipt? Mark Roberts. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the piece of paper like it was some kind of cruel joke. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Next, I went through her laptop. She'd left it on the desk in our home office, logged in as usual. Most of what I found was work-related, but there was a folder labeled Personal, buried deep in her documents. Inside were pictures. Some were innocent, selfies of her at work or out with friends. But then I found those pictures. They were taken in what looked like a hotel room, and Mark was in almost every single one. There were pictures of them laughing together, holding each other, and even one of him kissing her neck. My stomach churned. I had to close the laptop and step outside for air. Standing in the backyard, I felt a wave of emotions hit me all at once: anger, betrayal, sadness, humiliation. But beneath it all, there was this grim sense of determination. She thought she could get away with this, that I'd never find out. She was wrong. That evening, I kept up the facade of normalcy. I picked Ellie up from school, helped her with her homework, and made dinner. Brittany came home around 7 p.m., claiming she'd been stuck in traffic. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but inside, I was seething. "Long day?" I asked as casually as I could. "Yeah," she replied, dropping her bag on the counter. "Just one thing after another. You know how it is." I wanted to scream, to shove the hotel receipt in her face and demand answers. But I knew better than to act on impulse. Instead, I smiled and said, "You work too hard. You should take it easy sometimes." Her eyes flickered with something, guilt maybe? But she quickly covered it up with a laugh. "I'll try," she said, kissing me on the cheek before heading upstairs. That night, as she slept beside me, I started planning my next move. I knew I couldn't keep pretending forever. Eventually, I'd have to confront her. But when I did, I wanted to be prepared. I reached out to a lawyer the next day, someone recommended by a friend who'd gone through a rough divorce. I explained the situation and showed her the evidence I'd gathered so far. She listened patiently, nodding as I laid everything out. "You have a strong case," she said, leaning back in her chair. "But if you're planning to confront her, you should be careful. Emotions can escalate quickly in situations like this, and you don't want to do anything that could hurt your position later. She advised me to keep gathering evidence while maintaining a calm demeanor at home. It was the hardest advice I'd ever had to follow. Every time Brittany looked at me, I wanted to explode. Every time she laughed or smiled, I wanted to scream, "How could you do this to me? To us?" But I didn't. I kept my cool, even as I watched her sneak off for more work meetings and late-night phone calls. One night, I installed a tracking app on her phone while she was in the shower. It felt like crossing a line, but I needed to know the full extent of what was going on. Sure enough, the next time she worked late, her location pinged at the same downtown hotel. I wasn't just dealing with infidelity anymore. This was a full-blown betrayal of everything we built together. The hardest part was keeping it together for Ellie. She was too young to understand what was happening, and I didn't want her to sense the tension between us. I tried to shield her from it, making sure she felt loved and secure even as my world crumbled. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep this charade up forever. Sooner or later, the truth would come out. And when it did, Brittany wouldn't know what hit her. A week later, everything came to a head. I had gathered enough evidence to fill a small folder: hotel receipts, pictures, text message logs, and even the GPS data from the tracking app. I didn't need more proof. What I needed now was to confront Brittany, to lay everything out and finally hear her explanation, if she even had one. That Friday, Brittany came home later than usual. Ellie had already gone to bed, and I was sitting in the living room, waiting for her. I could feel the tension in the air as she walked through the door. "Hey," she said, dropping her bag on the floor and slipping off her shoes. She sounded tired, but there was a hint of nervousness in her voice. "Sorry I'm late. Work was a nightmare today." I didn't respond right away. I just watched her, my heart pounding as I rehearsed what I was about to say. "Brittany," I finally said, my voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." She froze mid-step, turning to look at me. Her eyes widened slightly, like she could already sense what was coming. "Sure," she said, forcing a smile. "What's up?" I reached over and grabbed the folder from the coffee table, holding it in my lap. "Sit down." Her smile faltered, and she slowly lowered herself onto the couch across from me. "You're scaring me, Caleb. What's going on?" I opened the folder and pulled out the hotel receipt, sliding it across the coffee table toward her. "This was from 2 weeks ago," I said, watching her face closely. "You told me you were working late that night." Her eyes flicked down to the paper, and for a moment she didn't move. Then, she let out a nervous laugh. "Caleb, I don't know where you got this, but—" "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "Don't lie to me. Not again." She blinked, her expression shifting from confusion to guilt. Caleb, it's not what you think." "Really?" I asked, pulling out the printed text messages next. I didn't need to read them aloud, her face said it all. She paled, her hands trembling as she reached for the papers. "Caleb, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "How long?" I asked, leaning forward. "How long have you been lying to me? To Ellie?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook. "Was it months? Years? Were you with him while I was putting Ellie to bed? While I was cooking dinner for our family?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she finally choked out. "I swear I didn't." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You didn't mean for it to happen? So what, you just tripped and fell into his bed?" She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "It wasn't like that. I was lonely, Caleb. You've been so distant, always working, always stressed. Mark was there when I needed someone to talk to. He listened to me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me," I snapped. "I was working to provide for this family. For you and Ellie. And while I was busting my ass, you were sneaking off to hotels with some guy from work?" She didn't say anything, just sat there crying while I paced the room, trying to keep my anger in check. I trusted you, I said, my voice cracking. I trusted you with everything. How could you do this? To me? To Ellie? I'm sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt you. I stopped pacing and turned to face her. You didn't just hurt me, Brittany. You destroyed us. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy in the room. Finally, I spoke again. You need to leave, I said quietly. Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face filled with shock. What? Caleb, no, please. We can fix this. I'll end it with Mark. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't throw away everything we've built. I shook my head, feeling the tears prick at my own eyes now. You already threw it away, Brittany. The moment you decided to lie, to cheat, you threw it all away. She begged me, pleaded with me to reconsider, but I didn't budge. I told her to pack a bag and stay at her sister's house for a while. I needed space to think, to figure out what to do next. As she packed, I sat in Ellie's room, watching her sleep. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. How was I supposed to tell her that her mom had destroyed our family? When Brittany finally left, the house felt eerily quiet. I sat in the living room, staring at the folder of evidence I'd spent weeks gathering. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like I'd just torn my own heart out and left it on the floor. But I wasn't done yet. The hardest part was still ahead. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. The silence in the house was overwhelming. No Brittany bustling around the kitchen making coffee. No sound of her laughter as she and Ellie chatted about their plans for the day. It was just me, alone with the reality of what had happened. Ellie came downstairs, her face lighting up when she saw me. She had no idea her world was about to change. "Morning, Daddy," she chirped, climbing into my lap. "Where's Mommy?" The question hit me like a ton of bricks. I forced a smile, stroking her hair as I tried to find the right words. "Mommy had to go stay with Aunt Kelly for a little while, sweetie. She'll be back soon." Ellie frowned, tilting her head. "Why? Did she forget something at Aunt Kelly's house?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and kissed the top of her head. "No, baby. She just needed some time to think about grown-up stuff. But don't worry, everything's going to be okay." Her little face scrunched up in confusion, but she didn't press me further. I knew that conversation was only the first of many difficult ones to come. For the rest of the day, I kept myself busy with chores and errands, anything to keep my mind off Brittany. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a pang of anxiety, half expecting it to be her. But it wasn't. She'd respected my request for space, for now, at least. By the time evening rolled around, I'd settled into the idea that I wasn't ready to tell Ellie the full truth yet. She deserved to be a kid for as long as possible, without the weight of adult problems crushing her. But the same couldn't be said for others. That night, after Ellie went to bed, I sat down with my phone and started making calls. First, I called my parents, who were shocked but supportive. My mom offered to come over right away, but I told her I needed to handle things on my own for a bit. Then, I called Brittany's sister, Kelly, to let her know what was going on. She didn't sound surprised. "I've had my suspicions," Kelly admitted quietly. "She's been acting strange for months, and every time I asked her about it, she'd brush me off. Caleb, I'm so sorry. I can't believe she did this to you." "Neither can I said, my voice heavy. "She might reach out to you soon. I told her to stay with you if she needed somewhere to go." "Of course," Kelly replied. "But Caleb, what are you going to do? Are you planning to?" "I don't know yet," I interrupted, not ready to say the words out loud. "I just know I can't let this slide." After hanging up, I felt drained, like I'd run a marathon with no end in sight. But there was still one call I had to make, the one I dreaded most. Mark. I didn't have his number, but I knew where he worked. Brittany had mentioned his department in passing once, and it wasn't hard to look up the company directory online. My hands shook as I dialed the number. "Mark Roberts," he answered, his voice smooth and professional. "Mark," I said, my tone icy. "This is Caleb. Brittany's husband." There was a long pause on the other end, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "Oh," he finally said, his voice faltering. Hi, Caleb. I know about you and Brittany," I said bluntly. "I know everything." He didn't respond right away. When he did, his tone was defensive. "Look, Caleb, I don't know what she told you, but—" "Save it," I snapped. "I've seen the texts, the emails, the hotel receipts. Don't insult my intelligence by trying to deny it." Another pause. Then, in a softer voice, he said, "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "That seems to be the running theme," I said bitterly. "But sorry doesn't fix anything. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed my family. My daughter's life. For what? A fling? No," I cut him off. "You don't get to explain yourself. I just wanted you to know that I'm not some clueless husband you can push aside. You're going to regret this." Before he could respond, I hung up. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling with adrenaline. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. But as I sat there in the silence, the weight of everything came crashing down again. The confrontation wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I still had to face Brittany. And this time, there'd be no more hiding behind tears and excuses. A few days passed, each one more agonizing than the last. Brittany had been blowing up my phone with texts and calls. Most of them were apologies, sprinkled with desperate pleas for a chance to talk. I ignored every single one. I wasn't ready to face her, not yet. But then, on Wednesday evening, she showed up at the house unannounced. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through TV channels without really watching, when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Brittany standing there, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen. She was clutching a small bag, and her hands were shaking. "Caleb, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I need to talk to you." I wanted to slam the door in her face, to tell her to leave and never come back. But a part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I'd fallen in love with, couldn't do it. "Ellie's upstairs," I said flatly, stepping aside to let her in. "Keep your voice down." She nodded, stepping inside and setting her bag by the door. I walked back to the living room without another word, and she followed, her footsteps hesitant. We sat across from each other, the tension in the air so thick it was almost suffocating. "I'm sorry," she began, tears streaming down her face. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know how much I regret everything." Why?" I interrupted, my voice cold. "Why did you do it, Brittany? Was I not enough for you?" Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. "It wasn't about you, Caleb. I swear it wasn't. I was stupid, okay? I was lonely, and Mark, he made me feel. I don't know, wanted, I guess." "Wanted?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You think I didn't want you? I've spent the past 8 years building a life for us, working my ass off to make sure you and Ellie had everything you needed. But that wasn't enough for you, was it?" "It's not that simple," she said, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. "You were always working, Caleb. Always busy. We barely spent any time together anymore. And Mark, he was there. He listened to me. He made me feel like I mattered." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. Somewhere deep down, I knew there was some truth to what she was saying. I had been working long hours, trying to provide for our family. But that didn't justify what she'd done. "You should have talked to me," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You should have told me how you were feeling instead of running to him." "I know," she whispered, her head hanging low. "I know I messed up. I know I broke your trust, and I hate myself for it. But please, Caleb, don't throw us away because of my mistake. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I stared at her, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that we could somehow rebuild what she'd broken. But another part of me, the part that had spent sleepless nights replaying every lie, every betrayal, wasn't so sure. You didn't just make a mistake, Brittany, I said finally. You made a choice. Over and over again. You chose to lie to me. To betray me. To put our family at risk for what? Some guy who told you what you wanted to hear. She didn't respond, just sat there sobbing quietly. I can't do this right now, I said, standing up and running a hand through my hair. I need time to think. You need to leave. Caleb, please, she begged, standing up and reaching for my hand. I love you. I love Ellie. I don't want to lose you. I pulled my hand away, my heart breaking all over again. You should have thought about that before you slept with him. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't waver. I walked to the front door and opened it, gesturing for her to leave. She hesitated for a moment, looking at me with pleading eyes, but eventually she picked up her bag and stepped outside. I'll call you, I said, my voice cold and distant. When I'm ready to talk. She nodded, wiping her tears, and walked down the driveway. I watched her get into her car and drive away, the taillights fading into the night. When I closed the door, the weight of everything hit me like a freight train. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, and let the tears come. The house felt like a hollow shell after Brittany left. Every corner of it seemed to echo with memories of a life that no longer felt real. I wandered from room to room, trying to distract myself with anything, dishes, laundry, tidying up Ellie's toys, but nothing could quiet the storm in my head. Ellie came down the stairs as I was folding a load of laundry. She was clutching her favorite stuffed bunny, her sleepy eyes squinting against the light. Daddy? She asked, her voice small. I thought I heard Mommy. I crouched down to her level, forcing a smile even though my chest felt like it was caving in. Mommy had to leave for a little while, sweetheart. She'll be back soon. Ellie frowned, hugging the bunny tighter. Did she forget something again? No, baby, I said softly. Mommy just needed some time to think about grown-up stuff. But don't worry, okay? I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. She nodded, though I could tell she didn't fully understand. I tucked her back into bed, stroking her hair until her breathing evened out, and she drifted off. Once she was asleep, I sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the soft glow of her nightlight. How was I supposed to protect her from this? How could I keep her world intact when mine had completely fallen apart? The next morning, I called in sick to work again. I needed time to figure out what my next move was going to be. Brittany had sent me a string of texts overnight, apologies, promises, and pleas for forgiveness. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I called my lawyer, the one I'd spoken to earlier. She told me to document everything, and that's exactly what I'd been doing. I need to know my options, I said, pacing the kitchen. What happens if I decide to file? She explained the basics of divorce proceedings, from custody arrangements to asset division. It was overwhelming, but hearing it laid out so plainly made it feel more real. Do you want to try mediation? She asked. Or are you leaning toward a more formal approach? I don't know, I admitted, running a hand through my hair. Part of me wants to fight for everything, but I don't want to put Ellie through that. That's a good mindset to have, she said. But whatever you decide, just make sure it's what's best for you and your daughter. The court will take her well-being into account above all else. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of evidence I'd gathered. Pictures, texts, receipts. It was all there, glaring back at me like a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I thought about Ellie, about what kind of life I wanted to give her. She deserved stability, love, and honesty. But how could I give her that when her mother had shattered our family? That evening, as I was putting Ellie to bed, she asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. Daddy, she said, her voice hesitant. Do you still love Mommy? I froze, the words catching in my throat. How was I supposed to answer that? I didn't want to lie to her, but the truth was so complicated. I'll always care about Mommy, I said carefully. Because she's your mom, and she loves you very much. But sometimes grown-ups, they hurt each other, and it's hard to fix. Ellie's eyes filled with tears, and she hugged her bunny tightly. I don't want you and Mommy to fight, she whispered. I hugged her close, my heart breaking all over again. I don't want that either, sweetie. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're happy, okay? That's what matters most. She nodded against my chest, and I stayed with her until she fell asleep. Later that night, Brittany called. I stared at her name on the screen for a long moment before finally answering. What do you want, Brittany? I asked, my voice flat. I need to see you, she said. Please. We need to talk about what's next. I don't think we have anything to talk about right now, I replied. I told you I needed time, and you showing up at the house uninvited doesn't help. I know, and I'm sorry, she said quickly. I can't lose you, Caleb. I can't lose our family. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy it, I said coldly. There was a long silence on the other end, broken only by the sound of her quiet sobs. I'll give you your space, she said finally. But please, don't shut me out completely. I hung up without responding. The next few days passed in a blur. I was walking around in a fog, trying to keep things as normal as possible for Ellie while dealing with the emotional wreckage Brittany had left behind. Every time I saw her little face light up when she talked about her mom, it was like a knife twisting in my chest. Brittany kept her promise to give me space, but her texts didn't stop. She'd send messages throughout the day, alternating between apologies and declarations of love. I didn't respond to any of them. What was there to say? Then, on Friday, I got a call from Brittany's sister, Kelly. Caleb, I don't mean to pry, she said, her voice hesitant. But Brittany's a mess right now. She showed up here in tears a few nights ago and hasn't stopped crying since. What happened? I sighed, rubbing my temples. She didn't tell you. She said you had a fight, but she didn't go into detail. Of course she didn't. Well, I said, my voice tight. She cheated on me. 4 months. With some guy from work. That's what happened. Kelly was silent for a moment. Oh my God, she said finally. I had no idea. Caleb, I'm so sorry. I can't believe she'd do something like that. Yeah, well, believe it, I said bitterly. She's not the person I thought she was. Are you okay? Kelly asked. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question. How could I possibly be okay? But I appreciated her concern. I'm managing, I said. Mostly for Ellie's sake. Kelly sighed. I don't know what to say. She's my sister, and I love her, but she messed up. Big time. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call. Thanks, Kelly, I said, my voice softening. I appreciate it. After we hung up, I sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't help but wonder what Brittany had told Kelly, what kind of excuses she tried to spin. Did she really believe she could downplay what she'd done? That evening, Ellie and I had dinner together, just the two of us. She was chatty, telling me all about her day at school and a new game she and her friends had invented during recess. I smiled and nodded, trying to keep the conversation light, but inside I was struggling. Daddy, she said suddenly, looking up from her plate. Do you think Mommy will come home soon? The question caught me off guard, and I took a moment to compose myself before answering. I don't know, sweetie, I said honestly. But no matter what happens, I'm always going to be here for you. Okay? She nodded, her expression serious. I miss her. I know you do, I said, my chest tightening. And she misses you too. It wasn't a lie. Brittany had texted me almost every day asking about Ellie, wanting to know how she was doing. But I wasn't ready to let her back into our lives just yet. The next morning, as I was making breakfast, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Brittany. The subject line read, "Please read this." I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. Part of me didn't want to give her the satisfaction of reading whatever excuse or apology she'd crafted. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the email and started reading. Caleb, I know you don't want to hear from me right now, and I don't blame you. I just need to say a few things, and then I'll leave you alone. First, I'm sorry. I know that word doesn't even begin to cover the damage I've done, but it's the only place I can start. I hate myself for what I did to you, to us, to our family. There's no excuse for it, and I won't try to justify my actions. You're the best man I've ever known. You've been an amazing husband and father, and I took that for granted. I let my own insecurities and selfishness cloud my judgment, and I betrayed you in the worst way possible. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Caleb. I don't expect it. But I want you to know that I'm going to do whatever it takes to make things right. I'll go to therapy, I'll quit my job, whatever it takes. I just want a chance to prove to you that I can be better. Please don't shut me out completely. I love you. I love Ellie. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn back the trust I've broken. Brittany. I set the phone down, my hands trembling. Her words felt genuine, but how could I trust anything she said now? I stared at the email for a long time, wrestling with my emotions. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that she could change. But the other part, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, wasn't so sure. I read Brittany's email a dozen times, each word cutting deeper into the tangled mess of emotions inside me. Her apology sounded sincere, but sincerity doesn't erase betrayal. I wanted to believe her, to hope she could be the person I fell in love with again. But trust is like a mirror, once it's shattered, the cracks never truly disappear. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I forwarded the email to my lawyer, asking for advice. She called me later that afternoon. Caleb, I know this is hard, she said, her tone patient but firm. But you need to think about what's best for you and Ellie. Rebuilding trust takes time, and even then, it doesn't always work. Are you ready to go down that road? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to give her a chance. For Ellie's sake, if nothing else. But the other part. I don't know if I can ever forgive her. That's completely normal, she said. There's no right or wrong answer here. But whatever you decide, make sure it's a decision you can live with. Don't rush it. Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. I spent the evening thinking about what I wanted, what Ellie needed, and what the future might look like if I let Brittany back into our lives. The following weekend, Brittany called again. This time I answered. Caleb, she said, relief flooding her voice. Thank you for picking up. What do you want, Brittany? I interrupted, my tone colder than I intended. I just want to talk, she said quickly. Please, can we meet somewhere? I'll come to you. I'll do whatever it takes. There was a long pause as I considered her request. Finally I sighed. Fine. Tomorrow afternoon. I'll text you the time and place. Thank you, she said softly. Thank you so much. After we hung up, I immediately regretted agreeing to see her. What was I hoping to accomplish? Closure? Clarity? Or was I just giving her another opportunity to manipulate me? The next day, we met at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. I arrived early, nursing a black coffee and mentally preparing myself for what was sure to be an emotional conversation. When Brittany walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. She spotted me and hesitated for a moment before walking over. Hi, she said quietly, sitting down across from me. I nodded but didn't say anything. The tension between us was almost unbearable. Caleb, she began, her hands clasped tightly together. I don't even know where to start. Why did you do it? I asked, cutting her off. I don't need another apology. I need to know why. She looked down, tears brimming in her eyes. I was selfish, she admitted. I felt invisible. Like I was just going through the motions day after day. And Mark, he paid attention to me. He made me feel special. I know that's not an excuse. It was wrong, and I take full responsibility for it. But that's the truth. Her words stung, but they also gave me a grim sense of clarity. This wasn't about me. It was about her insecurities, her inability to communicate what she needed. Do you even love him? I asked, my voice steady but cold. No, she said quickly, shaking her head. It wasn't about love. It was a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. I leaned back in my chair studying her. And what about Ellie? Did you think about her while you were sneaking around? Did you think about what this would do to her? Her face crumpled, and she covered her mouth with her hand. I didn't think, she whispered. I was selfish, Caleb. I put my feelings above everything else, and I hate myself for it. I wanted to yell at her, to make her feel the same pain she'd inflicted on me. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I sighed and rubbed my temples. Brittany, I said finally, I don't know if I can ever forgive you. And even if I could, I don't know if I want to. You didn't just betray me, you destroyed our family. How am I supposed to trust you again? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I don't expect you to trust me right away, she said. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove myself to you. Counseling, quitting my job, moving out, whatever you need. Just please don't give up on us completely. I didn't respond right away. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her a chance to make things right. But the other part, the part that had spent sleepless nights replaying every lie, every betrayal, wasn't ready to let go of the anger. I need time, I said finally. She nodded, wiping her tears. Take as much time as you need. I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere. As I watched her walk out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, anger, sadness, and a sliver of hope. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was starting to regain control of my life. In the days following our meeting, life felt like it was split in two. On one side, there was my role as a father, Ellie's constant. On the other, I was a man navigating the wreckage of a broken marriage, unsure if I could ever rebuild it. Brittany kept her promise to give me space, but her presence lingered like a ghost. The texts slowed down but didn't stop entirely. Most of them were short, updates about her therapy sessions or reminders that she was ready whenever I was. It was clear she was trying, but I didn't know if it mattered anymore. I kept myself busy by focusing on Ellie. We spent our evenings reading books, watching movies, and baking cookies that never turned out quite right but still made her laugh. Every smile I got from her felt like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of my darker thoughts. One night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with those wide, curious eyes that never failed to break my heart. Daddy, she said, her voice soft. Are you mad at Mommy? The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I sat down on the edge of her bed, taking a deep breath. I'm not mad at Mommy, I said finally, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and it can take a while to figure things out. But I promise you, no matter what happens, both Mommy and I love you very much. Ellie nodded, but her little brow furrowed with worry. I just want us to be happy again. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I do too, sweetie, I said, kissing her forehead. I do too. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from Brittany. Her voice was shaky, like she was fighting back tears. Caleb, I know I said I'd give you space, but I had to call. I just wanted to let you know that I've started seeing a therapist. I know I have a lot to work through, and I'm not expecting you to believe me right away, but I'm trying. I want to be the person you and Ellie deserve. That's all. I'll stop bothering you now. I stared at my phone, replaying the message in my head. Brittany's voice was raw, stripped of the defensiveness and excuses she'd clung to before. For the first time, it felt like she was truly taking responsibility. But was it enough? Later that week, I met with my lawyer again. I needed to know my options, not just for myself, but for Ellie. I'm torn, I admitted as I sat across from her desk. She's saying all the right things: therapy, accountability, quitting her job if necessary, but I don't know if I can believe her. And even if I do, how do I know she won't hurt me again? My lawyer leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, Caleb. Once it's broken, it takes time, sometimes years, to rebuild. The question you need to ask yourself is, do you want to try? I didn't have an answer for her. That weekend, Brittany texted me again, asking if she could see Ellie. I hesitated before responding. Ellie had been asking about her mom more often, and as much as I wanted to protect her, I knew she needed her mother in her life. Ellie and I will be at the park tomorrow, I wrote back. You can meet us there if you want. The next day, Brittany showed up at the park, her face lighting up when she saw Ellie running toward her. I stood off to the side, watching as they hugged and laughed together. For a moment, it was easy to forget the pain Brittany had caused. But then she looked over at me, her smile fading as our eyes met. She approached cautiously, leaving Ellie to play on the swings. Thank you for letting me come, she said quietly. I nodded, keeping my distance. Ellie misses you. I miss her too, she said, her voice cracking. And I miss you, Caleb. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm begging you to let me prove that I can be better. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked over at Ellie, who was giggling as she tried to go higher on the swings. I'm not making any promises, I said finally. You have a lot to prove. To me, to Ellie, and to yourself. If I even think you're not serious about this, it's over. Do you understand me? Brittany nodded quickly, tears streaming down her face. I understand. Thank you, Caleb. I swear I won't let you down again. As the sun set that evening, we walked back to our cars in silence. Ellie held both our hands, swinging between us as she chattered about her day. For a brief moment, it almost felt normal, like the family we used to be. But as I watched Brittany drive away, I couldn't ignore the knot in my stomach. This was just the beginning, and I had no idea if we'd make it to the other side intact. In the days following our meeting at the park, I felt like I was walking a tightrope. Brittany seemed determined to prove herself, texting me updates about her therapy sessions and even emailing a resignation letter she'd sent to her job. Mark was still employed there, but she wasn't. She claimed it was her way of cutting ties with the affair entirely. At first, I didn't respond to her updates. I wasn't sure what to say, and honestly, I didn't know if her actions meant anything. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to see a shift in her. She was quieter, less defensive, and more focused on Ellie than she had been in years. Ellie, of course, was ecstatic to see her mom again. Brittany visited a couple of times a week, spending hours playing with Ellie in the backyard or helping her with homework. Watching them together was bittersweet. I couldn't deny the love she had for our daughter, but it was hard to reconcile that with the person who had so carelessly betrayed our family. One Friday evening, Brittany stopped by to drop off a gift for Ellie. It was a simple thing, a craft kit Ellie had been asking for, but the thoughtfulness of it surprised me. She hasn't stopped talking about it, Brittany said, standing in the doorway as Ellie tore into the package with excitement. I figured it might make her happy. It will, I said, watching Ellie's face light up. Thanks. Brittany hesitated, glancing at me nervously. Would you maybe want to have dinner together? Just the three of us. Like old times? I opened my mouth to say no, but then Ellie turned to me, her eyes wide and hopeful. Please, Daddy? She asked, clutching the craft kit. I sighed, knowing I couldn't say no to her. Fine, I said, avoiding Brittany's gaze. But just dinner. That evening, we sat around the dining table, the awkwardness almost palpable. Ellie, oblivious to the tension, chattered happily about her day at school while Brittany and I exchanged polite but distant conversation. Do you remember when we used to make tacos together? Brittany asked, a small smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, I said flatly. That was a long time ago. Her smile faltered, and she looked down at her plate. After dinner, While Ellie worked on her craft kit in the living room, Brittany lingered in the kitchen, helping me with the dishes. "Caleb," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of running water. "Thank you for letting me come tonight. It means a lot." I didn't look at her. "You did it for Ellie, not for me. I did it for both of you," she said, her tone steady. "I know I have a long way to go, but I meant what I said. I want to fix this. I want to fix us." I set down the dish I was holding and turned to face her. "Brittany, I don't know if us is even possible anymore. You broke something that might not be fixable. Do you understand that?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I understand. But I have to try." I shook my head, feeling the familiar mix of anger and sadness rising in my chest. "This isn't something you can just fix with a few therapy sessions and a resignation letter. It's going to take more than that." "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "And I'm willing to do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there alone. Later that night, after Brittany had left, I sat in the living room, staring at the stack of evidence I'd collected during the early days of my discovery. The hotel receipts, the texts, the photos, it was all still there, a painful reminder of everything I'd lost. I thought about what my lawyer had said, about how trust takes years to rebuild. Could I really spend years carrying this weight? And even if I could, would it ever feel like enough? But then I thought about Ellie. About her laughter at dinner, the way her face lit up when her mom walked through the door. Could I really take that away from her? I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that the road ahead was going to be long and uncertain. The weeks that followed were strange. Brittany continued to visit regularly, always keeping things focused on Ellie and never pushing me for more than I was ready to give. It felt like she was walking on eggshells around me, and for once, I didn't mind. She should have been. For the first time, I noticed a shift in myself, too. The anger that had consumed me in the beginning was still there, but it wasn't as sharp as it used to be. It was like a dull ache now, a constant reminder of what had happened, but not as all-consuming. One Friday afternoon, Brittany called. "I spoke to my therapist about everything," she said nervously. "She suggested family therapy, if you're open to it. For Ellie's sake." I didn't respond right away. The idea of sitting in a room with Brittany, rehashing all the pain she'd caused, wasn't exactly appealing. But if it could help Ellie, wasn't it worth considering? "What would that even look like?" I asked cautiously. "It wouldn't be about us, at least not at first," she explained. "It would be about making sure Ellie feels supported and safe. And if we're ready, we could work on things between us later." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The logical part of me knew it was a good idea, but the emotional part was still resistant. Did I really want to open that door? "All right," I said finally. "I'll do it. But this isn't about us, it's about Ellie." "I understand," she said quickly. "Thank you, Caleb. Really." A week later, we had our first family therapy session. Walking into that office was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Brittany and I sat on opposite ends of the couch while Ellie played with a stuffed animal in the corner. The therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Harris, greeted us warmly and started with a few basic questions about Ellie's routine and how she was adjusting to the changes at home. Ellie, bless her heart, was completely honest. "Sometimes I feel sad," she said, clutching her stuffed bunny. "I miss when Mommy and Daddy were happy together." Her words hit me like a truck. I glanced over at Brittany and saw tears streaming down her face. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but it quickly faded. She was the one who had caused this. Dr. Harris guided the conversation gently, encouraging Brittany and me to share how we were feeling without putting Ellie in the middle. It was hard. I wanted to scream at Brittany, to lay all the blame at her feet, but I knew that wasn't what Ellie needed to hear. By the end of the session, I was emotionally drained. But as we walked out to the parking lot, Ellie grabbed both our hands, smiling up at us like everything was okay. "Can we go get ice cream now?" she asked, her eyes shining. Brittany and I exchanged a look, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a flicker of the woman I used to know. Sure, I said, forcing a small smile. Let's go. The following weeks brought more therapy sessions, each one slightly less tense than the last. Dr. Harris encouraged us to focus on small steps, building trust with Ellie, setting routines, and creating a sense of stability. One evening, as Brittany and I sat in the waiting room while Ellie had a solo session, she turned to me. Thank you, she said softly. For what? I asked, my tone wary. For giving me this chance, she replied. I know it's not easy for you, and I don't take it for granted. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stared at the floor, feeling the weight of her words. This isn't for you, I said finally. It's for Ellie. I know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Despite my lingering doubts, I couldn't deny that Brittany was trying. She'd enrolled in individual therapy, quit her job, and had even started volunteering at Ellie's school. She wasn't perfect, far from it, but she was making an effort. One night, after Ellie was asleep, Brittany called. I've been thinking, she said, about everything. And I realized something. I need to forgive myself before I can ask you to forgive me. Her words caught me off guard. For once, she wasn't trying to make excuses or beg for another chance. She was owning her mistakes in a way she never had before. Good, I said simply. You should. The line went quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm not giving up, Caleb. I'll keep fighting for our family, even if it takes the rest of my life. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her it was too late, that she'd already lost the fight. But another part, the part that remembered the woman I'd fallen in love with, wasn't so sure. It was a slow, almost imperceptible process, but the tension between Brittany and me began to shift. The therapy sessions helped, not just for Ellie but for both of us. Week by week, we started to unravel the layers of pain and mistrust. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of moments when I wanted to throw in the towel, but I kept going, for Ellie, and maybe a little for myself too. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, Brittany and I found ourselves lingering outside the therapist's office while Ellie played in the nearby garden. Do you ever wonder, Brittany said hesitantly, if we can ever go back to the way things were? I crossed my arms, staring at the ground. I don't know. Honestly, I don't think we can. Too much has happened. She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I get that. But maybe we don't have to go back. Maybe we can try to build something new. Her words hung in the air, heavy with both hope and uncertainty. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. A few weeks later, Brittany suggested we try a family outing. Something simple, a trip to the zoo, just the three of us. I was hesitant at first, but Ellie was thrilled at the idea, so I agreed. The day was surprisingly normal. We walked through the exhibits, pointing out animals to Ellie and laughing at her dramatic reactions to the giraffes and the sea lions. For a few hours, it felt like we were a family again. At one point, Ellie ran ahead to get a closer look at the penguins, leaving Brittany and me alone for a moment. She's so happy, Brittany said, her voice soft. It's been a long time since I've seen her like this. She deserves to be happy, I replied. She didn't ask for any of this. Brittany flinched at my words but didn't argue. I know. And I'll never stop trying to make it right, for her, and for you. I didn't say anything, but I could feel the weight of her words settling in my chest. That night, after Ellie had fallen asleep, Brittany lingered in the living room instead of leaving immediately. Can we talk? She asked, sitting on the edge of the couch. I sighed, setting down the book I'd been pretending to read. About what? About us, she said, her voice trembling. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I need to know, is there still a chance? Even the smallest one? I leaned back, running a hand through my hair. Brittany, I don't know. I want to believe you've changed, that you're serious about fixing this. But the truth is, I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And without trust, what do we have? Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I understand, she said quietly. And if the answer is no, I'll accept that. But if there's even a sliver of hope, I'll hold on to it. I'll keep fighting. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to untangle the mess of emotions inside me. I still loved her, some part of me always would, but love alone wasn't enough to fix what she'd broken. I can't give you an answer right now, I said finally. But I'm willing to keep trying. For Ellie's sake. A flicker of hope crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with a nod. Thank you, Caleb. That's all I can ask for. The weeks that followed were cautiously optimistic. Brittany continued to show up for therapy, for Ellie, and in small ways for me. She didn't push or demand anything, and I found myself appreciating the space she gave me to process everything. One night, as we sat on the back porch watching Ellie chase fireflies, Brittany turned to me. I miss this, she said softly. Just being here with you and Ellie. It feels right. I didn't respond, but I couldn't deny the truth in her words. It did feel right, in a strange, tentative way. But the reality of what had happened was never far from my mind. There were moments when I'd catch myself watching her, wondering if she was truly capable of change. Could she really be the person she claimed to want to be? For the first time in months, I allowed myself to hope. But I knew that hope was fragile, and the path ahead was far from certain. Every step forward felt like walking on glass, cautious, deliberate, and with the constant fear that one misstep could shatter everything. Brittany had become almost unrecognizable from the woman who had betrayed me. She was present, patient, and endlessly attentive to Ellie's needs. More surprisingly, she was respectful of my boundaries, never pushing me for answers or forgiveness. But forgiveness still felt like an impossible mountain to climb. One evening, after a family therapy session, Dr. Harris pulled me aside. You've been making progress, she said, her voice calm and measured. But I can see you're holding back. I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. What do you mean? I mean you're still guarding yourself, she said. And I understand why. Trust is fragile, and Brittany broke it in a profound way. But if you're serious about moving forward, even just for Ellie, you'll have to decide whether you're willing to let your guard down, even just a little. I didn't say anything. Her words struck a nerve because they were true. I was holding back. That night, I stayed up late, sitting alone in the living room with a drink in my hand. Memories of Brittany and me flooded my mind, our first date, the day we moved into this house, the nights we stayed up talking about our dreams. I missed that Brittany. But then, like a cruel joke, the darker memories crept in, the text messages, the hotel receipts, the lies. The hurt was still so raw, even months later. I didn't know if I could ever reconcile the woman I loved with the one who had torn my world apart. The next morning, Brittany came by to pick up Ellie for a day at the park. As I helped Ellie get her things together, I noticed Brittany watching me. What? I asked, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. She hesitated, then shook her head. Nothing. You seem tired. I didn't respond, handing Ellie her backpack instead. Have fun, I said, forcing a smile for Ellie's sake. Brittany lingered for a moment, after Ellie ran to the car. Caleb, she said softly, you don't have to keep carrying all of this by yourself. I stared at her, my frustration bubbling to the surface. You don't get to tell me how to handle this, I said. You caused it. She nodded, her expression filled with quiet remorse. I know. But I want to help carry it, if you'll let me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Later that evening, Brittany dropped Ellie off and stayed for dinner, something that had started happening more often. Ellie was thrilled, chattering nonstop about their day at the park, and for a while, it almost felt normal. After Ellie went to bed, Brittany lingered in the kitchen, helping me with the dishes. Thank you for letting me stay tonight, she said quietly. I shrugged. Ellie likes having you here. And you? She asked, her voice tentative. I didn't look at her. I don't know, I admitted. The honesty seemed to catch her off guard. She set down the dish she was drying and turned to face me. Caleb, I know I've said this before, but I need you to know. I'll never stop trying. No matter how long it takes. Her words stirred something in me, a mix of hope and hesitation. I wanted to believe her, but the fear of being hurt again kept me from fully letting her in. I guess we'll see, I said finally, my voice soft but firm. She nodded, accepting my answer without argument. As the weeks went on, the tentative truce between us began to solidify. We started spending more time together as a family, movie nights, trips to the park, even a quiet dinner out one evening. Each small moment felt like a step forward, but the weight of the past was never far behind. One night, after putting Ellie to bed, I found myself sitting on the back porch with Brittany. We didn't talk much, just sat in silence, watching the stars. I miss this, she said eventually. What? I asked. Us, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I miss the way we used to be. I stared at the sky, my thoughts swirling. We can't go back, Brittany, I said finally. Too much has changed. I know, she said. But maybe we can build something new. Something better. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something. I wasn't just holding back because I didn't trust Brittany. I was holding back because I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust my ability to forgive, to let go of the anger and pain. And maybe that was the real hurdle I had to face. It was a Saturday morning when everything finally came to a head. Ellie was sitting at the dining table, coloring pictures of her favorite animals, while Brittany and I lingered in the kitchen over coffee. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, but there was an unspoken tension hanging between us, something that had been building for weeks. Brittany cleared her throat, breaking the silence. Caleb, she said hesitantly, I've been thinking about something. I set my mug down, bracing myself. What is it? She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry for everything. I know I broke your trust, and I know I can't undo what I've done. But I want to move forward. Not just for Ellie, but for us. If that's even possible. I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms. You keep saying that, Brittany. That you want to fix this. But how do I know it's not just words? How do I know you won't do this again? Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. You don't, she said honestly. I can't promise you that I'll never make a mistake again. All I can promise is that I'll never stop trying to be better, for you, for Ellie, and for myself. I stared at her, my emotions warring inside me. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her the second chance she was so desperately asking for. But the other part, the part that still felt the sting of her betrayal, wasn't ready to let go. Ellie deserves a stable home, I said finally. If we're going to try this, it's not just for us. It's for her. Brittany nodded quickly, her eyes wide with hope. Of course. Absolutely. I'll do whatever it takes. I held up a hand, stopping her. But this isn't a reset, Brittany. It's not a clean slate. The past doesn't just disappear because you want it to. If we're going to try, it's going to take time, years, probably, and I'm not making any promises. She swallowed hard, nodding again. I understand. And I'm willing to put in the work, no matter how long it takes. Over the next few weeks, we started rebuilding, slowly and cautiously. Brittany began attending every family therapy session, and for the first time, she opened up about her struggles, her feelings of inadequacy, her regrets, and her commitment to change. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when the pain of her betrayal bubbled to the surface, threatening to derail everything. But each time, we worked through it, one conversation at a time. One evening, after Ellie had gone to bed, Brittany and I sat on the couch, talking quietly. Do you ever think we'll be okay again? She asked, her voice soft. I thought about her question for a long moment before answering. I don't know. But I think, maybe we can get to something new. Something better. It's not going to be easy, though. I know, she said, reaching for my hand. But I'm willing to try. For as long as it takes. I didn't pull away. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope, not for the life we'd had, but for the one we might be able to build. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, we began to find a new rhythm. Brittany's actions began to match her words. She was patient, transparent, and unwavering in her commitment to our family. There were still bad days, moments when the memories of her betrayal would resurface, threatening to pull me back into the darkness. But there were good days too, moments when I could see glimpses of the woman I'd fallen in love with, the life we'd built together. One evening, as we watched Ellie play in the backyard, Brittany turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" I asked. "For giving me this chance," she said. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I watched Ellie chase fireflies, her laughter filling the air. "It's not about what you deserve," I said finally. "It's about what Ellie deserves. And maybe, what we both deserve too." Brittany reached for my hand, and this time, I let her take it. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if we'll ever fully heal from what happened. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're heading in the right direction. One step at a time.